Greetings all, this is Bill Burke, and I'm very excited to bring you this latest episode of Blue Sky. But before I do that, I wanted to share this short announcement from one of our newest partners, the great podcast from Pushkin Industries, A Slight Change of Plans.
Hey there, I'm Dr. Maya Shankar, and I'm a scientist who studies human behavior. Many of us have experienced a moment in our lives that changes everything, that instantly divides our life into a before and an after. On my podcast, A Slight Change of Plans, I talk to people about navigating these moments. Their stories are full of candor and hard-won wisdom. And you'll hear from scientists who teach us how we can be more resilient in the face of change. Listen on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Burke, and in every Blue Sky episode, we'll be speaking to leaders, researchers, and thinkers whose stories and insights will remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. Everyone feels better when they support a worthy cause. And we all, at least most of us, also feel great when we get outside for some exercise. Even better is when these two things are combined, which explains the huge and growing popularity of runathons, walkathons, bikeathons, and the like. But these sorts of events, a-thons if you will, have not been around forever. In fact, today's Blue Sky guest was a pioneer, and today, the event he founded is a recognized leader in the field. The event is the PMC Challenge. The cause is cancer research. And the founder and current executive director is our guest, Billy Starr. Billy was motivated to ride his bike for cancer research all the way back in 1980, after suffering the devastating losses of his mother, his uncle, and his cousin. What started out as a wild idea to be shared with his circle of friends today features thousands of riders and volunteers. And as you'll soon hear, Billy's grit, determination, and entrepreneurial spirit were key to making this all possible. The PMC Challenge, or PMC, is a bikeathon with 16 routes ranging from 25 to 211 miles, raising more money for charity than any other single athletic fundraising event in the country, and contributing 100% of every rider-raised dollar to the Dana Farber Cancer Institute, or DFCI. In 2023 alone, the PMC raised $72 million, bringing its 44-year contribution to DFCI to $972 million. At the helm since the beginning, in the years since, Billy Starr has received honorary degrees from Babson College, Bay Path College, Salem State University, and Northeastern University. He's also received the Jimmy Fund's Tom and Jean Yawkey Memorial Award and the National Lung Cancer Alliance Lifetime Achievement Award. He was honored by the Friends of DFCI for more than 30 years of service and received the President's Council on Fitness, Sports, and Nutrition's Community Leadership Award in 2014, as well as DFCI's Sidney Farber Medical Research Award, a prestigious honor given to those who have made exceptional contributions to reduce the burden of cancer on society. Billy Starr's energy and enthusiasm are infectious, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with him as much as I did. Billy Starr, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Thank you, Bill. Good to be here.
I'm so glad to have you on the show. I'm a huge fan of you and your work, and I'm really excited to bring your story to our listeners. And I want to start where this started for you with raising money for cancer. And as I understand it was 1980 when you rode for the Jimmy Fund. With 35 friends, can you explain the motivation and idea behind that?
To really go back to origins, when I first did this, which was not a This was not a business plan. It was probably a personal purge of pain. I had lost my mother, uncle, and cousin in the 70s, and it rocked my world. And at first, I was going to do this by myself. Williamstown to Provincetown, bordered on the northwest corner of Massachusetts to the tip of Cape Cod, which is 302 miles. And it's a ride that I actually, in the ensuing years, I did do. But I went to the Jimmy Fund to tell them what I was going to do. And you got to understand how modest the Jimmy Fund was in 1980. I doubt the Jimmy Fund was a $2-3 million industry. However, they did have a name in New England. And if you grew up here with the Boston Red Sox, you heard the name Jimmy Fund, which was really the fundraising arm of the Dana Farber Cancer Institute. At any rate, I walked in there. It was a very modest building. It was April, and I told them, this is what I'm going to do. And they nodded, oh, great, good luck. But they did me one blessing. They introduced me to a woman who doesn't get enough credit for my career evolution. Her name was Joanne Goldberg. Herself was, at that point, a cancer survivor who's no longer with us. And she looked at me, she says, well, that's great. What's your goal? And I said, my goal is to raise money. And she looked at me and she said, so you think you're better off doing that by yourself? And I thought to myself, God damn it, she's right.
Good point.
I have to become an event coordinator. If I'm really sincere that I want to raise money. And I was, a comfortable middle class, what was I going to raise? $10,000, whatever. And on I went to creating an event that, and ironically, that was between April and September in 1980 was our first. So very modest, very bare bones, but with water stops and hub sites and an overnight sleep on one route, which that year was 1 year only, Springfield to Provincetown. We rode 220 miles. I advertised it as 200. Everyone got lost. We ran out of food. The ferry didn't run. And I was thrown into Provincetown Harbor by my crew, the 36 people who were attracted to this event. And the PMC was born.
Do you remember how much you raised that year?
$10,200.
Okay, everybody remember that number, $10,200, because we'll update shortly. And as I understand it, Billy, we take these things for granted, but sort of a-thons, if you will, bike-a-thons, run-a-thons, these fundraisers weren't really a thing in 1980.
No.
Is that fair to say?
Look, I didn't study the industry until, it could have been 15, 20 years later. Again, this was not a business model, except I would say to you that by Sunday night of PMC weekend, I said, on that bus ride home where I had no plans for 1981, people kept saying, they just kept saying, next year. I could help with it. And I heard how this was filling something in their psyche, in their humanity. And that, and I literally, I said, that was it. That was the line. I'm going to make this thing big. But to answer your question more directly, in this, prior to that, fundraising was different. It was bingo, black tie, and direct mail. And the whole sweat equity industry did not exist. It starts with the Pan Mass Challenge. Yes, there was a walk for hunger, but that was more about awareness. The PMC squarely said, you got to raise money. There was a minimum.
Yeah.
$350.
And you hold people to that minimum. That's not a suggestion.
That's correct. Although it wasn't until 1997 where we were the first event in the country that said, you got to put up a credit card. And you don't pay the minimum, we will bill you for the difference on the October 1st deadline. And that was a game changer, not only for the PMC, but for every event in the country that followed suit. just to make the point from a business standpoint. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but just to make that point to your audience, our delinquency rate went from 17% to 3% in 1 year.
Amazing. Yeah, the idea is you're there to have a great bike ride, but you're there to do more than that. And you can go have a good bike ride on your own. If you're going to do this PAMMAS challenge and all the logistics involved on your end, you better deliver the dough.
And quite frankly, it's not just about your good intentions, it's your commitment. And the credit card sort of brought that home to people. And if they weren't serious about raising money, they left. And that was fine.
And you mentioned earlier losing family members. If I have it right, your mom passed from melanoma when she was about before 50, 49, and you were in your early 20s.
That's correct.
So this is deeply personal for you. And I've ridden in your ride 3 times, and there's a moment before you start, and I don't know how long you've been doing this, but every year I did it, where there's kind of a moment of silence and a reminder of why they're riding. And it is powerful. Everybody listening to this has been touched in some way by cancer, and myself very directly with a niece who was being treated and later passed away. It's a powerful thing. Can you talk about that element of this ride, how it's just everybody there has some very direct connection?
You know, it's funny you mention that because you're taking me way, way back. Bill, I don't remember. Can you tell me the years you rode?
It would be probably 17, 18, and then again, I think in 22. Actually, I did it remotely during the pandemic. I did two centuries up in Maine by myself as a
But you were the modern era. If I could take you back, I mean, first of all, it was 5 years into the PMC before we ever did any public speaking at all about mission. And I say we, not me. My maturity, my willingness to talk about my own family background, it took a while. But that year, a gentleman named Bill Casey, whose son, he was from, you're reminding me of things I haven't thought about in 30 years. His son was a Jimmy Fund patient. He was our first speaker around a campfire at a Boy Scout camp, at a private camp in the Miles Standish Forest of Plymouth.
Oh, yeah.
And he spoke about it, and you could see in the crowd, the whole event took on a different meaning. So bringing it would be fair to say, I could have said to you in 1980, Bill, if you could ride 200 miles, that's your blessing. You should be able to raise money and say thank you that you got that kind of health. I was an athlete. That made sense to me. And I wasn't ready to be a leader in that sense, to talk my story, to put my pain out in a public forum. But I did see how important that became to focusing people beyond the ride of why we're all together. And that was a game changer. And I grew up, and as you know, by the time you rode, quite frankly, we had created an opening ceremonies that I ran for probably 40 years.
Yeah.
But in about 1996 or 7, we started doing a televised opening ceremony. First New England Cable News, then with WCVB, and now with WBZ. So this is buttoned down, televised. I've got a role in it. I still did my what we called the pre to the televised, the pre-opening ceremonies. And way back, I had lived the whole thing. But then we got pretty serious about cementing what Friday night meant to the weekend. And, it's a powerful thing. You had testimonial speakers, we're making videos, and the PMC was evolving clearly as this touched into a part of everybody's life. Obviously, the older I got, the more you heard that cancer was everybody's story. Unfortunately, I might have been to the game a little early with my mother. Nobody wants to be there, but quite frankly, I would suggest in my event, probably 85 to 90% of all people are familiar with cancer. Even our 35s and younger.
It's remarkable to think that Billy Starr got going with all of this way back in 1980 with just 35 of his friends, and that he's stuck with this idea and commitment to the cause of cancer research for all of these 44 years since. And as we've discussed in past Blue Sky episodes, life is tough, and we all will have difficult setbacks. The challenge for us is how we respond, and in Billy's case, losing his mother, uncle, and cousin all to cancer motivated him to do something about advancing research and cures for this terrible disease. And in 1980, for those 35 people, $10,200 probably seemed like a lot of money, and it was. But what's happened since makes this amount seem like pocket change. Okay, so we described the roots of this, 35 people, friends, basically. The last number I saw online was that in the years since, you have raised $972 million for Dana Farber and cancer research. Is that the right number?
That is not only correct. I want your audience to know that is a net number. That's not a gross number. That's a net.
Incredible. And so you're on the brink of $1 billion. I think the most recent ride was north of 9,000 riders, 350,000 donors. And I say these numbers because if you're not in New England or around this or haven't participated in, it's hard to describe the scope of this thing and the size and the logistics. It is an incredible event. Are those numbers right?
No, I got to correct you. It's 6,000 riders and 4,000 volunteers. So that's sort of
okay.
That 9,000.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's the other thing. So the spirit of the days, and I say days because depending on how you can sign up, you can do 1 day, 2 day, you can do the longer. You've been smart, I think, about making it accessible for people depending on their schedule or their physical ability. But everybody's got to be in pretty good shape. It's a real effort. Can we talk about the volunteers? Because when you're in this ride, everybody's smiling, everybody's encouraging, everybody's saying, "You're almost there. You got this." How did you grow from 35 friends and probably very few volunteers to where you are today? And can we talk specifically about the volunteers?
Well, none of it was an overnight story. We are now talking 45 years into this event. But first of all, I suppose it's fair to say everyone likes being part of a winner. And even as far back as 1990, the PMC was passing through 90 cents in the dollar of rider-raised revenue. We are now in our 18th year of passing through 100% of every fundraised dollar by the riders, reimagined, virtual, or volunteers. So this is, we've studied it. It is remarkably motivating to everybody who's a part of it's like the metaphor of the bike being the perfect machine. We are taking all that energy through the crank and giving the Dana Farber the biggest gift we can every year, which last year was $72 million. Why volunteers are attracted to the PMC? For multiple reasons. They got a cancer story. They are as ingrained in this event. They've taken a piece of identity no different than the riders. They are fixing bikes. They are paramedics. They are logistics people. They're driving trucks. Highly skilled and unskilled labor that is, frankly, over 16 routes, 47 towns, and 370 miles of infrastructure. I'm kind of fond of saying that I love the Boston Marathon, but it's a nice little event. PMC is a big event. It's almost, of a military scale of logistics.
No, it truly is. People, one of the reasons there are a lot more running road races than there are bike events, it's not just because a lot of people run. It's because a decent length bike race has to be more than a marathon length. And it's logistically a nightmare. And bikes break and get flats. And people, in your case, depending on if you're doing multi-days, it's getting people's clothing. It's getting all this, in the back of a truck to get it to Provincetown or wherever they're going to finish. It goes on and on. You mentioned Dana Farber, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, because if you're going to ride to raise money for cancer, there's any number of recipients that you could choose. Why Dana Farber, and can you tell us what that relationship's been like all these years?
Well, first of all, I suppose I'd say I was no different than any New Englander in that, like growing up with Ted Williams and the Boston Red Sox, now the Red Sox vie with the three other teams of almost equal prominence, depending on what year. But everybody grew up with the Red Sox post-World War II. So it seemed natural to me, even though my mother was treated at the Mass General, but that when I created the PMC, and it was to be cancer research, well, that was the Sidney Farber, which became the Dana Farber. So there was that. I wanted it to be cancer research and treatment. The relationship with Dana Farber, even though the Pan Mass Challenge is an independent 501c3 nonprofit corporation, it is 100% dedicated to Dana Farber. When I started this working out of my father's dining room for 17 years, all he ever wanted was for me to be hired by the Jimmy Fund so I could get benefits. Ironically, I would say I'm an entrepreneurial type, and it was probably the best thing that ever happened. I'm sure they would agree. Yeah. We were going places that traditional development offices were not doing. And it is interesting that when I have done a fair amount of consulting over the last 20 years, that when you meet of heads with, considerably big hospitals, they don't think in terms of sporting events. That's not how they raise money. However, the a-thon industry, and particularly the bike-a-thon, and who rides bikes, has raised considerably big money, as there are now dozens and dozens of bike events raising 1 million to, in our case, being the biggest by far, 72 million a year. I mean, that's pretty powerful. That makes a certain level almost as big as the Boston Foundation throwing off 5% a year. I'm sure that Dana Farber would tell you that to rely on the Pan Mass Challenge for 70 million or more per year allows them to go places, to hire and back treatment and therapies that they couldn't do without the money that we do. So we're fond of saying one of our mantras, there's a lot riding on us. So the collaboration with Dana Farber, particularly in the last decade or so, has just gotten better and better in terms of promotion, doctors, physicians, nurses riding in support of their own programs. That's pretty motivating as well. Yeah. And this event has been institutionalized. We are very well known in bike circles, philanthropic circles, New England circles, event circles, not quite a household name like Super Bowl or Fenway Park, but I'd say the PMC is pretty well known.
72 million is a huge number just to think about, but to put it in context, I believe you're still the largest sporting event fundraiser in the country, and if not the world. Is that fair?
I don't think there's anything that's within 40 million of it. I don't think there's a $30 million sports-a-thon weekend event in the country.
These numbers are all pretty staggering, and it's hard to believe that this summer, this event will pass $1 billion in net dollars raised for Dana Farber. Billy Starr is a remarkable leader and advocate, and he's been wise to form close relationships with the Red Sox and the Jimmy Fund, two organizations with an outsized presence in New England, providing the perfect partnerships and platforms to promote the ride and motivate donors. Now, back to our conversation. So you and I are talking in March. We're getting close to this year's. Have you set your goal for 2024?
We haven't gone public with a goal yet. I'll just say for now, more than 72 million.
and this will push you over $1 billion.
Yes,
from
the
day
billion.
one.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, we will celebrate $1 billion, but if I don't raise $1 billion, it'll be a scandal. I mean, it's only going to be 28 million for us to do $1 billion. So we should hit that around June, I would say. And it's going to be north of last year's goal, where obviously a lot of people want to be part of it. I hope your listening audience is getting motivated. I got room for all of you in one route or another. Think of the PMC as a menu. Find the route and fundraising minimum that works in your life. We want you all. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of alumni coming back who have been, in my phrase, on sabbatical because they want to be part of this $1 billion year. So we anticipate north of 72 million.
And like a lot of organizations, you were really knocked backwards by the pandemic, but you were incredibly creative. And I mentioned before doing a virtual ride. So basically, I signed up, I put my credit card down, I said I'm going to raise X amount of money. And I clocked it on Strava, and I took a picture at Sebago Lake and another at Portland Headlight and Cape Elizabeth, and that was my halfway point. I did my 2 days of riding. Have you continued with the virtual option, or is that something that because there's obviously a benefit to everybody being in a huge group and a pack, and it's efficient, but you could also raise money with people all over the country who might be riding
it's important
on
to
their
make
own.
Specifically the point you're making to your audience, which is in 2020, like everyone, we were on our way to record numbers of everything. When we canceled the event in April of 2020, we not only did that, but for the first time ever, we canceled the fundraising minimum. So we said you weren't obligated, but we're going to do a reimagined event. So nothing can make my point better about getting the client and culture that I wanted, that with a non-event, we raised $50 million. That's a pretty remarkable statement. So there's no candy, there's no PMC weekend, there's only funding cancer research at Dana Farber, and we're going to mail you our jersey. And you, Bill, like 6,000 others, ponied up, you raised real money, and we gave a check for $50 million. Believe me, most other events probably fell by 75 to 90%.
Oh, yeah.
If not,
absolutely.
Canceled everything, but not the PMC. And I would also say that our rebound, both in recessions through the decades, where the world shrinks sometimes 30%, the PMC shrunk 16% and got it all back with 2 years when the world takes 4 to 5 years. So we have a very motivated constituency.
And you even do, and I've joked with people, it's almost unfair. At one point in the ride, and I think it was twice I did it, with everybody else and once virtually, where you actually have pictures of young people who are patients. I think you have sort of an adopt a patient kind of program. And so you're riding along, you're tired, it's hot, you're sweating, you just want to be done. And then you see these pictures of these young people. I remember getting choked up saying, this is unfair. Can you talk about that and how because it's very gracefully done. It's not, maudlin or too over the top. It's just incredibly inspiring. Can you talk about the little things you do, including that?
That's called our PMC Pedal Partner program. And it's not just the emotional hit on the weekend. We are partnering at the time of registration, the winter quarter. Individuals and teams of riders with a family undergoing cancer treatment at Dana Farber with a child. Now that's a sensitive and sophisticated needle and thread.
Sure.
When you're doing this, families are rightly firstly concerned about their child. They may or may not know the PMC, but what ends up happening is it not only introduces a family to the PMC and a well-intended group of riders, but it really says to the family, you're not in this alone. And this program has been tremendously successful for 20-something years. At first, Dana Farber was very skittish about allowing the public to have access to families and patients. But we've all gotten a lot better at it through the years and bringing these kids out. So you're referring, of course, to Mile 85, the Lakeville Water.
I knew it was pretty far into the ride.
Yep. Yeah, you're already emotionally getting worn down, physically getting worn down. And it is true.
Yeah.
We have a pedal partner tent where these kids are, where they're rendezvousing with their families and teams of riders who are, coming from all over the country. And it's pretty powerful. But mostly when you look at the kids, when you go into the tent, they're not seeing your tears or your emotion. They're just having a good time. They're just being kids.
Absolutely. You have plenty to focus on with this ride and the logistics and raising money, but I imagine over the years you've also sort of stayed in touch or on top of progress in cancer. One of the things I encourage people to always think about in terms of trying to have an optimistic outlook is the advances we have made in medicine in general, but cancer specifically. Do you maintain a sense for that? And I don't know, it could be that even what your mother passed from is now, more curable, childhood leukemias and all these other things that are so much. Do you have a sense for that? And is that one of the things that keeps you going?
Well, it isn't a question of keeping me going, but to your last point, I could say to you, my brother and I have seen x-rays of my mother and her tumor and the melanoma, and they missed it. That wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. She wouldn't have died.
Right.
It was totally treatable, but it wasn't.
Wow.
And I'm not bitter. I'm just part of, you just move the ball forward. So, again, with all of us in life, you could say that cancer is part of the living and dying process with molecular change. But nobody wants to be that person. But at the same time, certain cancers, I believe, lymphomas were like 10, 20% curable when I started. Childhood cancers were like 20, 25, and now they're 80%. So, nothing moves quick enough. And I'm in this game 45 years. And yet in the, however you would look at the arc of history of cancer research, which arguably, probably starts around 45-ish, Children's Hospital with Sidney Farber, when they started, everyone died. Can you imagine being a doctor going to work every day? I mean, these guys and women, to me, they're heroes. I mean, to be able to face that and recognize that you're going to try and make it better. I don't any longer expect cancer to be gone in my lifetime, but that's irrelevant to how I see my work and my motivation. I could say to you cutely, my motivation is to run a perfect bicycling weekend for 10,000 people, knowing full well that'll never happen.
Right.
Both humans, weather, I mean, there's, the amount of stuff that goes, man plans and God laughs, right? So I feel I have the right equilibrium for what's turned out to be almost a lifetime's worth of commitment to our mission. And I'm pretty happy with how it's gone.
Everything they do at the Pan Mass Challenge is well thought out, and the images at Mile 85 are a great example. With all the encouragement from volunteers and spectators, it's hard to ever forget why you're riding. But in case the grind of the hours in the saddle make you question what you're doing, these pictures of kids fighting cancer are the perfect reminder. And it really is helpful to remind ourselves how far we've come in terms of cancer research, diagnosis, and treatment. As sad as it is to hear, Billy's suggestion that his mom would have survived her cancer if it had happened today drives this point home. Getting back to our conversation, I wanted Billy to reflect on his own experiences with cancer and how these caused him to make this ride and this cause his life's work. So in terms of you personally, obviously, as we said before, everybody listening has had some brush with cancer. Some might be experiencing it as we speak. Some might have loved ones who are struggling in tough treatment. You lost people very close to you at a very young age. What would you say it was about you? There's different ways you can respond to that. You can curl into a ball and go into a depression, and I'm sure you had incredible grieving experiences, but there was something in you that said, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to get on a bike. I'm going to start this thing. And you mentioned you're entrepreneurial, but I imagine there's that, but there's something else that made Billy Starr say, I'm going to make something out of this. I'm going to make something positive out of this. Is there something you can touch on or describe to us that has motivated you all these years, especially in the early years?
Well, I honestly, without humor, I could say, first of all, just my idea turned me on. And I was probably 10 years into the PMC before I understood my own skill set that made me the right guy. But I would also say what I saw my role, and literally from September 1980, so that was it. It was full time. That's all I did. But I never was going to ask anybody to do what I wasn't willing to do myself. I absolutely saw myself riding and raising money.
Yep.
And I never questioned that for a second, but I guess I'm considered pretty aggressive. And, for people who are reticent, I go, look, the money's not for you. Don't tell them how much fun this is. But I was also I was also an athlete, though I was new to biking. I didn't consider myself a biker for 10 years, but I took to it. Our first video in 1981, our second year, I'm in sneakers, running shorts, and a t-shirt. And that was, back then it was freaks and geeks. Not this, hip, hippies into yuppies sport that bike, golf that bike, but it's also the perfect sport to age with. It's something you can grow into, you can improve for many, many years. And I think for those of us who have stuck with the sport, we've all built communities of training, friends, do we eat and drink to bike, or do we bike to eat and drink? I mean, either, which way it kind of works out. Right. So, right guy, right time. You got to remember, the PMC was 10 years before Greg LeMond and 20 years before Lance Armstrong, and the Tour de France resonated with the United States, and biking just exploded. And the PMC was ahead of all of that.
Incredible. So you also mentioned doing consulting around the country, and there may be people listening who think, gosh, why just Massachusetts? Why can't we do something where I live in XYZ town or state or in the country or around the world? What advice would you have? Obviously, sounds like you might be available for some consulting, but how could people try to replicate, maybe, not realistically, not at this scale, but at smaller scales and growing? What are the things you've learned that are pitfalls or possibilities or advice you'd give people who think this would be a great idea for their
to many of the
part of the world? To
the aspiring athons around the country, I said, well, if you hire me, I'll save you 10 years of mistakes because I made them.
I'm sure.
And, if you just, again, take that initial efficiencies, it's communication. It is, what's your mission? Just like Joanne said to me in 1980, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to run a great bike ride? Are you trying to get people together? Are you trying to raise money? Well, I think we know at this point, all the athons are there to raise money. So standards, the economy, the choice, but as importantly, leadership and communicating clearly to your constituency what you want of them, what you're asking of them, what we can do for you, or what you need us to do for you. It's reciprocity matters. And when you do that, not everybody can be living this life full time, but everybody can give a part of their life. And the very least, most people can do is write a check. So,
Yeah.
There's a role for everybody. And given how big cancer is, unfortunately, there's a motivation for everyone as well.
Yeah, and I can say from my own experience that there is something magical. You even said it's almost spiritual and inspiring when you're with a large group in a connected cause. I'd add too, I think when it's a physical activity, there's that extra element of this gratitude that you feel that you're able to ride a bike when someone's lying in Dana Farber getting chemotherapy. So I would encourage people, yeah, it feels good to write a check. It feels great to ride a bunch of miles with a bunch of people who are like-minded and supporting a cause and to be cheered on by volunteers. And one of the great things about your ride too, like you mentioned all these towns, you're riding through neighborhoods and there's families out there who probably come out every year and they ring bells and cheer. There's something very unique about it versus simply writing a check.
I'm fond of a certain quote that goes back at least 10 years from a letter I received. And a woman who had done both the Boston Marathon and now the Pan Mass Challenge, and her comment was, and I quote, "They're both wonderful events. But the critical difference is that in the Boston Marathon, people line the road and they say, you can do it. But in the PMC, people line the road and they go, thank you for riding. And that's all the difference in the world," end quote. Very powerful.
I'm getting a little choked up when you said, because I'd forgotten that. The thank yous are so powerful. It's just different. And yeah, so I thank you for making that an opportunity for people. Thank yous always provide a lift to those receiving them, and no more so than when you're slogging along in a long bike ride. And it truly is a gift that's provided by the PMC to create an event that can bring so many thousands of people together in the spirit of appreciation for helping others. We've talked a lot on Blue Sky about the link between gratitude and optimism. And I know from my own experience, whenever I've felt tired on a bike and unsure about my desire to keep going, reminding myself to be grateful for the privilege to be able to ride in the first place always goes a long way. For our final segment, I wanted Billy to look ahead and share his vision for what's next for him and the Pan Mass Challenge. So you've been at this, we're going on 45 years, you're going to pass $1 billion this year. I'd like to talk about your optimism for the future. Where do you see this going? I have no idea, where you are in your career arc, if you're even thinking about retirement, but let's say you're 45 years in, and where are you in, where is PMC and where's Billy Starr in, 15, 20 years? How big will this get? What other things do you hope to accomplish?
Well, yeah, Bill, I love your attitude. I mean, I am 72. So where am I in 20 years?
You don't look 72.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And I'd say to your audience, get on a bike.
Yes.
Look, what I've learned about myself in this journey is I have skills that got revealed in the PMC that there's no golf course waiting or beach waiting for me that could bring
right.
much satisfaction as what I do here. I do slogans, I do advertising, I do sales and sponsorship, I do public speaking, I ride a bike. I've done the books, but I thank God I've been removed from that.
Yes.
This event reflects me in many ways. I don't know why I'd ever want to walk away from it. I've got lots of help. There are 13 of us full-time now, and with 6 summer interns, a volunteer professional head staff of another 14 people, and 4,000 volunteers beneath them. It is a big organization. The check is the tip of the iceberg. This is a big organization, and everybody has a hand in its success. And the money we raise is kind of too important to fail. Look,
Yep.
weather is the biggest obstacle year to year, not traffic. We're well known now. Obviously, Cape
Yes.
Cod has become a global destination, but we get a lot of consideration. Those people used to honk at us, now honk.
Yes.
And, to your audience, I would also add one of the things about when you said about the thank you for riding is there's this reciprocal love bombing between the rider and volunteer. Trust me, you don't get this kind of love from your children, on a regular basis. So, it is unusual that way. And if you could do this on your own, you would. But you come to the PMC weekend, it is a powerful experience. And the intimacy that was there in the 80s and early 90s has been replaced by something bigger, which is what we can do when we actually work together. And probably a good lesson for us to conclude with it, because in our divisive political world, as well as the global issues in this country, and waiting in the background or the foreground, climate change, there are people doing good work, and most people are of good intent, and that is palpable on PMC weekend. It is a familiar experience, and why would I ever want to give this up? That people come up to me, CEOs of company, and they nod and they go, I wish my company ran like this. It is palpable that if you ride a bike, we've got the logistics, and we are facilitating your success so we can raise a ton of money and get it into the system as quickly as possible to change and improve outcomes.
Well, as someone who has been, like everyone, touched by cancer, but also as someone who has participated in your event, everything you're saying, there's no exaggeration whatsoever. It is a powerful, powerful, emotional, moving, wonderful thing that you've created. And the money that you've raised is just staggering. And so, Billy Starr, I thank you so much. And I hope that this reaches people far and wide, and that they're as inspired by you as I've been over the years. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us on Blue Sky.
Bill, that's very nice, and we should remind them, pmc.org. Get on, register, donate, volunteer. Registration is open. We've already got 5,800 registered. So some routes are filling up. I will say that.
Get on it while supplies last, and you won't regret it, I promise you. Thank you so much, Billy Starr.
Thank you, Bill. My pleasure.
Billy Starr is one of those fortunate people who has found great fulfillment doing work he was meant to do. As he says, I have skills that were revealed at PMC. And we're all fortunate in turn that he's channeled these talents to deliver so much good into the world. If this conversation has inspired you to participate in the PAMMAS Challenge as a rider, volunteer, or donor, check out pmc.org for more information. It's also a great site for inspiring videos and photographs from past rides, and will give you a wonderful sense of the spirit of this event. I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Billy Starr. Before you go, please consider giving us a rating or review. And be sure to follow the Optimism Institute on social media if you don't already. You might also want to subscribe to this podcast to be sure not to miss any future episodes. And go to theoptimisminstitute.com to sign up for our monthly newsletter, Blue Sky Weekend. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.